Kyle Tucker is not a man who talks for the sake of talking. That is the first thing you need to understand before a single word of what he said makes complete sense. In a sport populated by athletes who have been media trained to within an inch of their lives, who have learned to say meaningful sounding things that contain no actual meaning, who have mastered the art of the answer that reveals nothing while appearing to reveal everything, Tucker operates differently. He is direct. He is specific. And when he decides to say something, it is because he has decided the thing needs to be said. Which is exactly why what he revealed after the game that ended the Dodgers' losing streak hit the United States baseball media like a thunderclap on a clear afternoon. Nobody was expecting it. The press conference after a win, especially a win that ends a difficult stretch, a win that releases the particular pressure that accumulates inside a clubhouse during a losing run, usually produces a specific kind of conversation. Relief. Gratitude. Careful, generous credit distributed across the roster. The kind of post-game exchange that satisfies the immediate appetite for quotes without opening any doors that the organization would prefer stayed closed. Tucker walked through every one of those doors simultaneously. He sat down in front of the microphones, answered the opening question about the win, acknowledged the relief of ending the streak, and then, without being asked, without being prompted, without any visible indication that he had been building toward it, he said the sentence that stopped U.S. sports media completely in its tracks. Shohei noticed it before Roberts did. 5 words. 1 sentence. No elaboration offered in the moment, just those 5 words hanging in the air of the press conference room while the journalists present processed what they had just heard and scrambled to figure out exactly how to follow it. What Tucker revealed in the minutes that followed rewrote the entire narrative that had been constructed around the Dodgers' batting order change. The story the public had been given, the story of a manager making a difficult decision to protect his most valuable player, was not wrong. But it was incomplete in a way that changed everything about what that decision actually meant. Because the truth, according to Kyle Tucker, was this: Dave Roberts did not see it first. Shohei Ohtani did. To understand what Tucker revealed, you first need to understand the environment in which it was happening. The losing streak was not a catastrophic collapse. It was not the kind of extended free fall that triggers front office panic and managerial speculation and the particular media circus that descends when a championship-caliber team appears to be coming apart at the seams. By the external measurements available to anyone following the standings, it was a difficult but manageable stretch, the kind that every team in a 162-game season navigates at least once, often more. But inside the clubhouse, the texture of those losses carried something that the box scores could not fully transmit. The Dodgers were not losing because their talent had suddenly evaporated. They were not losing because the pitching had collapsed or the defense had become unreliable or the organizational depth that makes them one of the most formidable franchises in baseball had somehow depleted itself overnight. They were losing in the particular way that psychologically complex losses happen, close games decided by single swings, leads built carefully and surrendered quickly, moments where the margin between winning and losing felt razor-thin in a way that accumulated across games into something heavier than any individual result deserved. Inside that environment, observation becomes everything. Players watch each other differently during losing streaks. The details that get filtered out during winning stretches, the small mechanical inconsistencies, the subtle shifts in timing, the barely perceptible changes in a teammate's approach at the plate, become visible in a way they are not when everything is working. The heightened attention that difficult stretches produce turns a clubhouse into a room full of people studying each other with an intensity that is rarely discussed publicly. Tucker was watching. He is always watching. That is part of what makes him the player he is, not just the physical talent, but the observational intelligence that processes what is happening around him and files it into a framework of understanding that informs every decision he makes. And what Tucker was watching, during those losses, was Shohei Ohtani. Here is where the story gets complicated in a way that the 5-word sentence only begins to capture. Tucker did not reveal that he observed something wrong with Ohtani during the losing streak. That is the crucial distinction, the detail that separates this story from the straightforward injury narrative that had been circulating in the days preceding the batting order change. What Tucker revealed was something more nuanced and, in certain ways, more remarkable. He revealed that Ohtani had already identified the problem himself. Not identified it in the sense of recognizing a physical issue that required medical attention. Identified it in the strategic, analytical, preparation-driven sense that defines how Ohtani processes every aspect of his performance. He had noticed something in the opposing team's approach to him during the losing streak, a pattern in how pitchers were attacking him, a shift in the information that opposing dugouts appeared to be acting on, and he had traced it back to a specific vulnerability that the current batting order construction was creating. Tucker described a conversation, quiet, brief, almost casual in its delivery, in which Ohtani explained what he had observed to a small group of teammates. Not a meeting. Not a formal presentation. A conversation, the kind that happens naturally in the spaces between baseball activities, conducted in the unhurried tone of a man sharing an observation he has already processed completely and is now making available to the people around him. The substance of what Ohtani shared was this: the batting order as currently constructed was giving opposing pitching staffs a strategic advantage that had nothing to do with individual talent matchups. It was a structural issue. The way the lineup sequenced the Dodgers' threats was creating predictable patterns that sophisticated pitching staffs were identifying and exploiting across multiple games. He was not criticizing Roberts. He was not questioning organizational decision-making. He was doing what he always does, studying the available information, identifying the pattern, and arriving at the conclusion that the evidence supported. The conclusion was that the batting order needed to change. And Ohtani had reached that conclusion before anyone else in the building had arrived at the same place. The question that immediately followed Tucker's revelation in every newsroom and broadcast studio and baseball podcast that picked up the story was the obvious one. How did what Ohtani observed get from that quiet clubhouse conversation to Dave Roberts' lineup card? Tucker addressed this directly. And the answer he gave added another layer to a story that was already more textured than anything the initial reporting had suggested. It did not go from Ohtani to Roberts directly. That is not how Ohtani operates. It is not in his nature, and Tucker, who has spent enough time in this clubhouse to understand how Ohtani's particular combination of confidence and humility actually functions in practice, was clear about this. Ohtani did not walk into Roberts' office and tell his manager that the lineup needed to be rebuilt. He did not position himself as someone whose analytical conclusions should override the manager's decisions. What he did was make his observation available. He shared it with the people around him, teammates, in the natural flow of clubhouse conversation, in a way that was neither a demand nor a suggestion but simply the honest transmission of what he had seen. He put the information into the room and trusted the room to do with it what it needed to do. What the room did, specifically, what certain players who heard the observation did, was bring it to the coaching staff. Not as a complaint. Not as a player revolt against the manager's lineup decisions. But as exactly what it was: useful, specific, analytically grounded information that the people responsible for the Dodgers' success deserved to have. Roberts heard it. He processed it with the same deliberate care he brings to every piece of information that informs his decision-making. He cross-referenced it against what he had been observing himself, against what his coaching staff had been tracking, against the data that the Dodgers' analytical infrastructure continuously generates and refines. And he changed the lineup. Everything about the batting order change looks different now. When the news initially broke, when the lineup card was posted and the story spread that Roberts had removed Ohtani from the DH position and rebuilt the batting order, the narrative that assembled itself around that decision was the one Roberts' post-game comments gently encouraged. A manager making a protective decision. An organization prioritizing long-term health over short-term production. The kind of difficult, responsible choice that separates great managers from merely competent ones. That narrative was not false. Roberts did make a protective decision. He did prioritize something larger than the immediate game. Those elements of the story are real. But Tucker's revelation adds a dimension that transforms the meaning of the decision entirely. Because what it reveals is that the batting order change was not simply Roberts protecting Ohtani from himself. It was Roberts and Ohtani arriving at the same conclusion from different directions, Ohtani through his own analytical observation, Roberts through the convergence of multiple information streams, and the decision reflecting both of those processes simultaneously. This is not a story about a manager overruling his best player. It is a story about a player and a manager thinking at the same level, reaching the same conclusion, and executing a change that neither of them could have fully validated without the other. Tucker understood exactly what he was revealing when he said those 5 words. He was not undercutting Roberts. He was illuminating something about the relationship between Ohtani and the organization that the public had not previously seen clearly. The Dodgers do not simply manage Ohtani. They think alongside him. The reason Tucker's post-game comments caused the stir they caused in U.S. sports media is not simply that the information was surprising. Surprising information emerges from professional sports constantly. It is, in a sense, the fundamental product that the sports media ecosystem runs on. The stir was caused by what the information implied about assumptions that the American baseball media had been comfortably operating with. The dominant narrative around Shohei Ohtani in the U.S. media, particularly in his role as a position player, as a designated hitter, as the offensive centerpiece of the Dodgers lineup, has tended to focus on his physical gifts, his production, his results. The what of what he does rather than the how. The numbers rather than the thinking that generates the numbers. Tucker's 5 words punctured that narrative with surgical precision. Because what they revealed is that Ohtani is not simply responding to the game. He is reading the game at a level that precedes the people whose professional responsibility is to read it. He noticed it before Roberts did. That sentence, in the American sports media context, is not just a compliment to Ohtani. It is a reframing of the entire conversation about what kind of player and what kind of baseball intelligence is present in the Dodgers clubhouse. It forces a reconsideration of every previous analysis that treated Ohtani primarily as a physical phenomenon, as an athlete whose gifts are best understood through exit velocity and launch angle and strikeout rate, and asks whether all of that analytical apparatus has been measuring the least interesting thing about him. The stirring in newsrooms and broadcast studios and podcasting networks across the United States was the sound of an entire media infrastructure recalibrating. Here is the truth that Tucker's revelation puts permanently on the table. The statistics that define Shohei Ohtani's career, the home runs, the ERA, the batting average, the strikeouts, the records that keep accumulating in categories that had to be created specifically to accommodate what he does, are the most visible layer of what makes him extraordinary. They are the layer that is easiest to discuss, easiest to compare, easiest to transmit across language barriers and cultural contexts and levels of baseball knowledge. But underneath that layer lies something that does not appear in any database. Something that Kyle Tucker, sitting in front of a microphone after a win that ended a losing streak, decided the public deserved to know. Ohtani is not simply executing at a high level. He is observing, processing, and understanding the game around him at a level that consistently places him ahead of the moment he is currently living in. He sees patterns before they are fully formed. He identifies strategic vulnerabilities before they have fully manifested in the results. He processes baseball information with a speed and accuracy that makes the people watching him, teammates, coaches, managers, feel like they are always one step behind. That quality, the thinking, not just the doing, is what Tucker wanted people to understand when he said those 5 words. Shohei noticed it before Roberts did. He always does. The game that ended the losing streak is already receding into the past the way baseball games always do, quickly, replaced by the next game and the next series and the next accumulation of results that the season demands. But Tucker's words are not receding. They are spreading, across platforms, across languages, across every corner of the baseball world that pays attention to the Dodgers and to Ohtani with the intensity that their 2025 season has earned. And inside the Dodgers clubhouse, something has shifted in the public understanding of how this team actually works. The batting order change that appeared from the outside to be a unilateral managerial decision has been revealed as something more collaborative, more intelligent, and more revealing of the internal dynamics of this particular organization than any post-game press conference was ever going to show. Roberts makes the decisions. He carries the responsibility and the authority that come with managing a Major League Baseball team. None of Tucker's revelation changes that. But Ohtani sees the game first. And now, because Tucker decided those 5 words needed to be said, everybody knows it.